Session number 1 is disability justice in medicine, and it's a conversation between myself and Alice Wong. Alice Wong uses she, her pronouns. She's a disabled activist, writer, media maker, and consultant. She's the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture that was created in 2014. She's also the editor of Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century, an anthology of essays by disabled people and disability visibility, 17 first-person stories for today, an adapted version for adults. Her debut memoir, Year of the Tiger, An Activist's Life, will be available on September 6, 2022 from Vintage Books. You can find her on Twitter at sfdirewolf. And with that, I'd like to welcome Alice Wong.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, Alice.
Hey, everyone. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So I wanted us to talk in this session. I wanted to invite you here to advance the conversation on disability in medicine and disability justice. I think that we're going to need the principles. We do need the principles of disability justice to really advance our cause. And perhaps this topic doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. And so, you know, I got interested in disability justice after reading your book, Disability Visibility. And after I read some of that, I went to the primer from Sin's Invalid that's called Skin, Tooth, and Bone. And, you know, that the book cleared some things up, but I still have some questions about it. I mean, I was thinking of disability justice as just analogous to, say, social justice or racial justice, you know, fairness or equity, or the opposite of inequity or injustice, the distribution of wealth or opportunities and privileges in a society. But disability justice to me is much more complex than that, and really focuses on intersectionality. And I just wanted to read this one quote. They said, as we challenge white supremacy, settler colonialism, gender normativity, violence that targets trans people, we challenge able-bodied normativity, and through this clearing practice, we create disability justice.
Yeah, I think disability justice is complex and nuanced. And that's because disabled people are part of every culture in every community. I think, you know, there are clear connections to racial justice and other justice movements. In the fact that I think the goal of most movements that are justice-based is liberation. And I don't know many people in the audience, you know, what does liberation mean? What does it look like? I think everybody has a particular idea when they hear the term liberation. But I think, you know, many of these movements are moving in different ways, different approaches, with a similar goal toward freedom. You know, the freedom to just be, the freedom to be in a world without cages or prisons. You know, a world where we can all have our needs met. You know, and I don't think that's, you know, unrealistic, right? I think we've learned throughout history that we need to be braver and wilder and use our imaginations to think about what's possible in order to make those things possible, right? So I think for some people who might be in the audience, like thinking, oh, a world where everyone gets their needs met, like that sounds highly unrealistic. Well, part of the work is getting to thinking about that. Like just we don't have to have like the exact blueprints, but I think we can acknowledge that the world we're living in now really is centered on some people and leaves a lot of people out. So I think a radical change takes creativity, but I also think we have to think about the infinite possibilities and that it can happen if there is a collective political will to make those changes.
I wanted to share a couple pictures from the book that I thought were really instructional here. So the photograph on the left shows Black disabled activist and artist Leroy Moore, who has short cropped hair, a mustache, and a beard. He is standing bare-chested with his hands together out in front of him. The text above him reads, "All bodies are unique and essential. All bodies are whole. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. We move together with no body left behind. This is disability justice." And on the right, there's a photograph of Black poet and organizer Kara Page, holding her hands out before her, leaning back, smiling wide. The text reads, "All bodies are caught in the bindings of ability, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, sexuality, citizenship. We are powerful not despite the complexities of our identities, but because of them. Only universal collective access can lead to universal collective liberation. This is disability justice."
Yeah, I would say that, you and I and the folks at Stanford are so lucky to be in the San Francisco Bay Area because the disability justice framework was actually developed here, by primarily disabled people of color and trans and queer disabled people about 10, 15 years ago. And I've been really lucky to know some of the people who originated it, such as Patty Bird, who is the executive director of Citizen Valid and the author of the primer that you just mentioned. I highly recommend folks who actually want to really read in detail to dive in and to get the primer. Patty Bird is one of the people that's really an expert and somebody who knows a lot more than me. I also got to know and become friends with Mia Minkus and Leroy Moore, who you just saw the image of, and the late Stacy Park Gilbert. And, I'll just want to clarify a few things in case people are new to this term. Disability justice, here's a few things that it's not. So I'll just start with that. It's not created in opposition or in response to disability rights. I think disability justice is not interchangeable with disability rights. I've seen a lot of people describe these as disability justice, but really they're talking about disability rights. So that's been happening a lot lately as disability justice has become more well known and more widespread. Disability justice is more than just about diversity, right? Even though it's centered and created by disabled people of color. And I see a lot of the parallels with, especially in academia, where I see the term intersectional and intersectionality being used when people are really talking about diversity. And that is not the same thing. Intersectionality is also an analytic framework created by Black feminist thinkers talking about power dynamics and how multiple approaches intersect. But a lot of people now like to use the term intersectional as if it's a blanket term for diversity. And I think that really, people are just kind of glossing over it. So just personally, I think of it as a framework that looks at wholeness, collectivity, interdependence, and systemic change. And it takes into account the interconnections between colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, and ableism. And that you can't separate disability issues from these forms of oppression. I think historically, the disability rights movement has always been very single issues focused and led primarily by white middle class people with physical disabilities. And that, there's a sense that rights are given to us, through laws. But I think a lot of people who are part of the disability justice movement have a broader view that, inherently we have worth, that, the state, may give us rights, but we already have worth and rights aside from the state. And that, as many marginalized communities have known, is the state cannot save us. And I know this might be shocking to some people, but it's really true, especially if we look at the pandemic. The state will not save, it cannot save a lot of marginalized people who have been left out. And we've seen such a proliferation of the mutual aid, right? That's just one example of not waiting for the state, because by design, the state was not meant to save, but to serve a lot of people.
I want to, since you mentioned a lot of the terms of disability justice, I wanted to show this other slide that shows the 10 principles. So this is a graphic here. These are intersectionality, leadership of those most impacted, anti-capitalism, cross-movement organizing, recognizing wholeness, sustainability, cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation.
Yeah, just to give more context or background, is not to say that we don't need both, right? Disability rights and disability justice. For me, it's just a set of values and principles that I try to live by. But it's not prescriptive. It's a framework for people to draw from and try to incorporate in their everyday life. So what about you, Peter? I mean, it's like, what does DJ mean to you, and what are some ways that it resonates with you, the principles?
Well, yeah, thank you for explaining all of that. I mean, the contrast with disability rights, I think, is very enlightening. The core value of DJ is leadership of disabled people of color and of queer and gender non-conforming disabled people. So it really got me thinking, like, what are we doing here? Are we advancing disability justice? I'm talking about SMATI, my group. I mean, do we have the right people at the table? Are we thinking about our privilege? I mean, especially the part about disability rights centering white experiences and mobility impairments. Got me thinking, am I a stereotype? I'm the person you described, a white middle class person with a mobility impairment. And so, should I really be leading? I mean, I do have a lot of privilege. I didn't even realize the extent of the problems we had at Stanford until I founded this group and people started coming to me with their stories because, I had been treated so well. And so, that was really, it really forced me to look inward and examine myself as a leader. And we're making headway, and I want to serve as a leader. We do have a diverse board of directors. We've done things to address ableism. Well, disability rights addresses the symptoms of disability discrimination, but not the root, right? And the root of disability oppression is ableism.
Mhm.
And so, we made changes to our bylaws to incorporate anti-ableism language. We looked at gaps in our representation.
Mhm.
We started intersectional discussion groups with other employee resource groups at Stanford. So we had a book club, a Lane Library book club with the LGBTQ groups, talking about the intersection of LGBTQ and disability. And then we also had one on the intersection of Blackness and disability with two people that you know very well, Diana Sejas and Justin Bullock.
Mhm.
We started this BIPOC podcast series on docs with disabilities. But it's been kind of hard because, well, for example, we have this patient family advisory council. And when we put it together, this is like pairing staff and patients, which I think is a really amazing thing. But we're trying to we're trying to recruit Black participants, but we're largely unsuccessful.
Mhm.
And then we have this COVID Journey project looking at the experience of people with disabilities and people of color during the pandemic. And it's also been really difficult to recruit Black patients for that.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, obviously, there's something missing in what we're doing. And I'm not sure the path to improve that, but at least we recognize it and we're trying.
Yeah, and I think that's another issue of academia, right? That's when we're researching underserved, underrepresented groups that, for the most part, the people who are doing the research formulating the questions, formulating the priorities are not from those communities. So that sometimes the projects themselves, there's a reason why people aren't participating because it doesn't align with what is priority important to them, right?
Yeah.
That they see the research staff that doesn't reflect them as well. So there's a lot of reasons why, structural reasons too, right? That people are unable to participate. But that could be another, whole, you know, uh, separate talk. But I think, you know, uh, one way I think Spotty can really also practice display justice on campus is to be in solidarity with other movements on campus. For example, if there are cases of, you know, students, faculty, staff, fighting unfair policies, transphobia on campus, racism. What about the staff who have, fighting for wages and equal pay? The adjunct staff, the custodians. There are lots of ways to show up for others that is absolutely part of the disability justice is to use whatever leverage, whatever resources you have to work in, in comradeship with others because, we aren't separate really. And so many of our struggles are similar. So, we can't expect other people to support us if we don't support other people.
Right. And that's been a challenge, we started in the School of Medicine and then became the employee resource group for the hospital, but it's been hard to recruit hospital employees, including staff. I mean, staff ended up forming their own group at the university because, I think that their needs are a little bit different than the faculty, and they are, like you said, underrepresented and undervalued. And so we've been trying, mostly to support those with less power. So staff, students, residents, I think these are the people who suffer the most in our system. I was also thinking, is there room for both disability rights and disability justice? Because nothing changed for disabled people until discrimination was outlawed with Section 504 and the ADA. So, I think that we just need to keep these things in mind and really center our efforts around anti-ableism. And so I did want to talk to you about ableism also. I mean, when I think about ableism, and I talk about it when I give speeches and presentations on the topic, discrimination and prejudice, stereotypes, misconceptions, generalization, the concept that people with disabilities are inferior, that typical abilities are superior, that we require fixing, that people are defined by their disabilities. It's a defining character flaw. And, I do experience ableism personally, and I have at times. I mean, people hitting on my wife right in front of me, like as if I'm not there, telling my wife she's an angel for what she does and God bless them. People talking to my companion rather than talking to me. And, frankly, when diversity efforts don't include disability, and there's been multiple times on campus where like diversity efforts spring up. For example, the Commission on Justice and Equity had no representation of a person with a visible disability. Our Ideal project on campus for improving diversity, no people with disabilities at the table. Messages about diversity, accidentally forgetting about mentioning disability. It just keeps on coming. So, do you want? But I guess I wasn't thinking about it, and you shared a definition with me that I hadn't seen before, and I wasn't so much thinking about it in terms of a system. Analogous to racism, where beliefs take the form of systemic oppression that's based in white supremacy. So I want to show that that slide that you shared.
Could I jump into
Yes.
my own kind of definition?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Let's do that first, and then
Yes.
we give a little bit of a deeper dive into systemic ableism. But there's all kinds of discrimination, right? So like what you experienced with your wife and partner is, interpersonal, individual experiences, and so much of it is part of this broader societal problem, right? It's diversity initiatives. Every university loves to champion DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they often do forget about disability because, again, this is about how we think about disability as something that is something still very much within this medical model, right? That's something that's a phenomenon happening in an individual versus disabled people have culture. disabled people have a history. Disabled people are part of movements. There's community. I think that's what is still the missing piece, right? That non-disabled people do not recognize disabled people as an actual community and culture. And that's often, in my opinion, why I think DEI often leaves out disability, because still in our popular culture, in our representation of disability, we think of it as something to be fixed, something that is a disease or illness, something that is often has been thought of as, a fate worse than death, right? These are still very popular notions, a tragedy, right? And I think this is why there isn't a broader understanding of the richness of disability, that it's not all misery, and that's why the anthology I edited was one attempt, part of a larger movement of work by disabled people to just show our everyday lives without explanation or without apology. That here are brilliant, passionate, interesting disabled people who care about a lot of things. And I think part of ableism that really continues to really hurt me and really troubles me is the fact that the bar is so low, and that in many situations I find myself having to defend my existence, having to explain myself over and over. I'm guessing that a lot of disabled med students have to really carefully plan and negotiate and think about if they disclose or whether they request accommodations or just share their life story with their colleagues. Like there's a lot of things that are fraught, right? That's there's still a real aversion to disability, because I think our American individualists very much, hyper masculine capitalist culture makes us feel like disability is a failure, is a weakness, and that it is a reminder to a lot of people that, life is fragile, that life is, that we need one another, that it really goes against these, you know, uh, streams of culture that keeps telling us, freedom and individuality, the bootstrap mentality is the most important thing, that we have to just produce and work. And that's how we get our identity and our worth in society. And I think, frankly, a lot of disabled people, non-disabled people, see disabled people, it is almost a reminder or a harbinger of, the real fragility of the human experience. And I think that's why so many people, I think, purposely want to distance themselves from disability.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know this for a fact because, I wasn't always disabled. I became disabled when I was 30 years old. So it's going to be actually 20 years in January since I was paralyzed. And for a lot of time after my injury,
Mhm.
I didn't really want to hang out that much with disabled people because it reminded me of my own disability and made me sad. And, but I've been thinking a lot lately about my own ableism and internalized ableism and how I still have some of that left in me, and it leads sometimes to like self-loathing and imposter syndrome, and manifests in a lot of different ways. So do you want me to show that slide on
Sure.
ableism,
Yeah,
or?
yeah, and I just want to add that I feel that way too. It's a struggle, and I think when I realized to myself that there's something wrong with me as a person, it's really about the structural oppression that creates these conditions for a made to feel bad, or made to feel like we're never enough, that we're not good enough. And I think that's been really helpful. Like, and I know not every disabled person or any person is really into being politicized, right? But for me, coming into a disabled identity, right, that is something that I'm very open about. That's, I think of it as a political identity. That's been really helpful for me because I know I'm not the only one. And I know that when disabled people are connected within a community, that we can get a lot done, that we can create change together. And that to me has been really a lifeline.
Yeah,
So this definition that you're about to pull up in a slide is by one of the contributors to my anthology, to Leila A. Lewis. And it's from the blog. They have an ongoing kind of working definition. And, I think of it as a very comprehensive one, but it's definitely still a work in progress. And I just want the audience to like kind of reflect on this definition because it does, you know, have a lot of strands to it. It is very complex, but I think it's also spot on. I think it's in my opinion. So this is by Talila Lewis from January 2022. I'll just read the definition and thank you for creating this slide. Ableism is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, to productivity, to desirability, to intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, health, wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. And you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. And when I think about that, definition, I think about a lot about how medical education and the healthcare system really does assign a value to normalcy and what we think of as health and functioning. And I think a lot about how medical students or any students in the health sciences, how graduate education really does center on those who can actually perform and produce at a certain level, right? This sense of elite education really does leave out a lot of people. And I think the earlier comments by Lizzie before our talk really also, reflects that, right? That's there are so many people who will be great in the health professions, but are completely left out because of standards, quote unquote standards, that are often centered on ableism and classism.
Yeah, I was really proud actually of Stanford. Recently, we decided to redo our technical standards. I um I redid them in 2007 with Sherry Blowett, who's now a PM&R professor at Harvard. She was a med student at Stanford, and she and I made a certain amount of headway to get rid of some of the language, like see, hear, um, things that are based on like sensory and motor function, but there's still a long way to go. And so I was proud that we actually improved those quite a bit. But the third question we're going to talk about is, how is medicine fundamentally ableist? And I do want to talk about this culture of strength. Um, Recently, I read Dr. Neera Jain's thesis, and she talks about this concept of the capability imperative, which is like the logic in medical education, which is flawed, that demands that students fit into the existing environments, right, without making changes for them. And that the capability imperative is this contrast between a conception of disability as inability, which the administration and faculty often have, and then this other expectation of hyper ability, of that people in medicine have to be hyper able. And she talks about three motifs: this selfless superhero physician, the real world of medicine, where you may be able to get accommodated in school or residency, but they're never going to accommodate you in the real world. You'll get chewed up and spit out, which is sometimes true, but not always. It doesn't have to be the case. And then this idea of the malleable student, that a student that you bring into medical school should fit the existing environment. They should be able to tolerate whatever you throw at them, and that they're like a pluripotent stem cell, that after medicine they should be able to be whatever field they want, including a surgeon, for example. So you look at a student who maybe has a mobility disability and is never going to be a surgeon, and they'll think, oh, we can't take this person. Well, there's a lot of fields where you don't need to have the manual dexterity of a surgeon, and not even the obvious ones like psychiatry and radiology. And the other thing she talks about in the thesis is the legibility of disabilities. So for like when people have understandable disabilities, like when they come in a wheelchair, for example, or they have cancer, those students often are more fortunate and they get advocated for in the system. But people with like disabilities, or with invisible disabilities, or with even worse, undiagnosed conditions or newly diagnosed that the student may not even understand themselves, those people especially are discriminated against in the system. And that's true for us as providers, but also for our patients.
Yeah, and I would say the actual experience. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not anybody who's in the health sciences, but I would say the experience of medical education and training and working in the profession itself also can be quite traumatic, and also can create a lot of mental health disabilities and trauma and substance use. And this is also another function of the profession that it really pushes people to the limits. And I think this is another reason why so many people in all kinds of professions are afraid to disclose or ask for help, because they don't want to be seen as less than or somehow stigmatized by their colleagues that especially within a culture of this kind of infallibility. And yeah, I am familiar with both Dr. Jade and Dr. Beeks, and I highly recommend their guide, called the Guide to Assisting Students with Disabilities, Equal Access to Health Science and Professional Education. It's a
Mhm.
great book, and yeah, so they're just. I'm so glad that they're both scholars working in this area that's really needed in terms of qualitative research about the lived experience of disabled students and doctors.
Yeah, they've both taught me a lot, and Lisa's been a fantastic mentor also. Yeah, and they're really, I think, laying the groundwork for transformation. Well, in the Skin, Tooth, and Bone book, they talk about like the disability bureaucratic system,
Mhm.
right? And how accommodations, that we're really focused on accommodations for the students. And when you focus on accommodations, you're focusing the locus of the problem on the person with the disability. It's analogous to the medical model where the student is broken and must be accommodated rather than looking at the system as a whole and transforming it. But I do have to say, like what comes after. I mean, certainly we should make tweaks in the existing system. It's accommodations based. We need to make accommodations information easier to find and fix HR processes that are broken. I'll say that the AAMC guide that they published in 2018 lays a great it's basically a blueprint for how to improve disability services and disability culture in a medical school. So people don't have to start from scratch. But, right now they talk about like the three levels of disability inclusion, right? Like there's the law as the floor, which is this compliance-based approach, which is what we're stuck in now, where people want to protect the system. They're just focusing on the law, on not getting in trouble and doing the bare minimum. And then you have the spirit of the law approach, where people are trying to do the right thing. It's the law as the floor, and so we can go above and beyond. And then, but at the top of that pyramid is the transformative approach. And I think the transformative approach is building the system with people with disabilities in mind and incorporating universal design, expecting that disabled people are going to be there and that they're valued and they need to participate. And so the system really does require complete transformation.
Yeah, and I think one starting point again, the blueprint from the AAFC report, that's a great place to start in terms of policy and structural changes. And I think it also starts with just the acknowledgement that, I already said it earlier, but like the system, there's still this kind of defensiveness, right? That every institution or profession has. That's these systems by design do not serve everyone. And that's, we should, I think healthcare systems, need to acknowledge the historical violence and discrimination of Black, Brown, Indigenous people, of women, disabled people, people with marginalized bodies. We just have to make that as explicit as possible. That's, medical racism is a real thing. Structuralized oppression also makes people more likely to become disabled, or experience, debility. It's often in concert with other systems, such as the state. So, and the prison industrial complex. So I think it starts with, I think, institutions being accountable about, their practices and the history. Right? Somebody, I mean, just look at 20, 20, 30 years ago, like the numbers of people of color and women and queer people in the medicine. It's like, yeah, it's still huge disparities, I think. It needs to be improved, but I think, historically, so many people have not been seen as the typical doctor, right? And I think that's again there's so much misogyny and anti-blackness and sexism that plays in that. And I think also this is a longer term kind of goal, but I think doctors and other people in the health professions and health policy, we need to rethink what care is, where it's delivered. And, if we're talking about disability justice principles, I'm really referring to thinking about care taking place in non-carceral settings. As I understand it, disability justice is abolitionist. So that means the end of psychiatric hospitals, nursing homes, and other institutions. I know many people in this audience may be super skeptical and may feel like a lot of these places are there for safety and certain types of care that's can only be done in these kinds of settings. But what if we were to talk to people who have been through these settings and have been harmed by them? What if we actually collaborated and partnered with communities that are most impacted and think about how care can be redesigned? Again, this is not something that I have the solutions for or that you have, but this is a longer process. But I do think, we do need to really fundamentally change the way we think about care delivery, whether that's healthcare services or community-based services. I think we just have to look at, for example, with this pandemic and how a large percentage of the deaths from the pandemic took place in nursing homes, where people were trapped, where people could not leave. And I think that says a lot about how disposable our society thinks about older and disabled people. That's, they died and, somehow like people are really ready to move on pretty quickly to reopen everything and to end mass mandates. I think that says a lot about systemic ableism.
Yeah. Well, they knew what was happening in the nursing homes was wrong because Governor Cuomo tried to bury the data so it wouldn't get out. We have some great questions from the audience, Alice, I'd like to ask. There's one, how can scarcity models of health, both for providers and patients, be addressed by disability justice?
Well, I would say that I read a really great paper by Dr. Sam Bagitos. He wrote a piece when the pandemic came out in 2020, and I was in a podcast with him talking about healthcare rationing. So we're going to talk about scarcity with that example of, again, speaking personally, I'm wearing a mask that's connected to a BiPAP machine, which is a non-invasive form of ventilation. And if you all remember 2020, that there was a lot of conversation about free allocation of ventilators and scarcity of ventilators, scarcity of hospital capacity. And, Sam wrote something in this, I believe it's a legal health policy journal. We talked about how scarcity is an invention, that it's actually something that's a construct that, we never really had to get to that point of scarcity. But there've always been mechanisms in place to eliminate scarcity. And yet the scarcity model forces people, into this, rat race, right? That it pits people, it pits groups against each other. And that's definitely not, you know, it's not what I think of as justice or equity or access. So, I think we need to think about how, what underlies these, scarcity, like supply chains, right? Like, what are the ways that these can really be reconfigured so that we don't ever get into a situation where, lives are on the line. I have no idea if I answered that question, but I hope I got to it a little bit.
Yes, that was awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's, people talk about accommodations as being privileges rather than rights. And there's this slippery slope fallacy that, oh, if we do this for you, we're going to have to do it for everyone.
Right.
Or the models of hospital staffing where we keep, where it's based on the labor of residents and fellows. And yet, we don't increase the funding for residents and fellows because that'll cost the system money. And so rather than improving staffing, which is totally within our control, we run lean and crush people in the process.
And it's interesting that it took a pandemic for a lot of institutions to pivot, and there was the money, right? There wasn't the political will. So many things that became available remotely that disabled people have been pushing for years before the pandemic. But it's only when non-disabled people became inconvenienced that somehow all this kind of access became more widespread. And I think that's another example of how so many arguments about the woodwork effect and about scarcity really are, a matter of gatekeeping. Right? It's about who deserves and who has the means to provide these things. And I think that's a lot of, questions about accountability, questions about power, and questions about leadership and transparency.
I met a student once, and I won't say from where, but he has some spine problems, and it's difficult for him to sit down. And he wanted a chair that you could sit on your knees, with that didn't have a back. And this chair costed $99, and it took them 6 months to get him this chair, figuring out how they were going to pay for it. And this was at a very wealthy institution, quibbling over $99. There's a really great comment that's applicable to this part of our discussion. They say, I think we need to stop talking in terms of accommodating and start talking about accessibility. I see these as two different things. One frames it as a special burden and the other doesn't. There's another great question to strategically, what are key snowballs to get rolling to dismantle ableism in healthcare?
Well, one of my joys and, life's work is about storytelling. And I think being in conversations right now, like with you, Peter, like I think this is part of the snowball. With disabled people are connected with one another, they mobilize. And when we're actually centered in a conversation or in a space, it hopefully invites people to learn and to take what we are offering and ways that they could be allies with us, right? Like we need everyone to have great access, and that access really does benefit all people. And if we see that as a public good, as a social good, I think that really will go a long way. That is the fact that there is infinite capacity for accessibility, right? That's not this commodity. That's not this need that has to be like, tightly controlled as a resource. Why don't we liberate accessibility? I think that would be an interesting kind of rethinking of it. But I do think one of the snowballs is to tell more stories about the lives of disabled people, that we have families, friends, cultures, real insight. And I think, I do believe many of us have the solutions for the world's problems. And, I think that's, when you look at toward any marginalized community, there's a level of wisdom that I think people still don't understand or recognize. So I think that's one of the big snowballs that I would like to push forward. And I hope that that helps doctors and med students feel seen. So whether they're ready to identify or be more open, the fact that they know that they're not alone, like that to me is why I do what I do, is that is to show who we are, but also to let people feel seen and heard.
I think that's a wonderful message to end on. I wish we could talk longer. I could talk to you all day, and I hope this isn't the end of our friendship and relationship, but only the beginning. I'd love to learn so much more from you. We are attacking this at Stanford. There are people who are attacking it nationwide. I think this is a huge priority. I should also make a plug for our mentorship program we started for healthcare providers and healthcare students with disabilities. If people are interested in mentoring or getting mentorship, they can email daychin@stanford.edu. If someone was to put that in the chat, DAYCHIN at stanford.edu for the mentorship program.
Oh,
And
also, people should take disability studies at Stanford.
mhm,
There were students who really had to fight just to get disability studies back at Stanford. He was at risk of being eliminated. So audit or buy the books for the syllabus, but just take advantage of disability studies on your campus. And I think you'll come away with a much broader and kind of world changing view about disability.
all right. Thank you so much, Alice. It was a pleasure.
All right, bye everyone. Thank you.